So we are going to move on to listen from Karen, sorry, oh, Karen from the Science Museum Group. Karen, it's great to have you with us and learn more about informal education and informal environmental education that you guys run in the amazing Science Museum that we have here in London. I think the city is so proud to have this museum. I'm sure everyone who lives here and has been in your museum before, and it's a great opportunity to listen to you in your presentation. So thank you very much for this today. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Lovely. Hello, everyone. Hola. Thank you for inviting me to speak. Delighted to be taking part in this seminar series. I hope that at the end of this talk, you see museums as a resource to support you when teaching environmental education, and that the tools I share inspire you to think about how to engage those people who feel less comfortable with science. I've also included a simple hands-on activity that you could use back in the classroom, so we'll have a go at that later. Okay, so here's the overview of my talk, which is structured around the two focus questions. In terms of the engagement question, today I'll share with you some tools that we created and use every day at our museum. These tools have been informed by Science Capital research, and I will tell you a little bit about that concept in a moment. I work at the Science Museum in London, which is what Arthur was saying. This museum is part of the Science Museum Group, so we're a group of 5 museums in England who share the same learning approach. And before the pandemic hit, we reached around about 5 million visitors a year. So our offer includes hands-on galleries showcasing science principles, historic collections from the past and the present, and contemporary science exhibitions and science festivals. For example, on climate science, obviously this is a topic very much at the forefront today, and most recently global pandemics. So our audiences, we like to say, range from 0 to 90 plus years. So our engagement approach, we want everyone to make meaningful connections with the science, technology, engineering and math that shapes their lives. So it's very much our approach is to ignite their curiosity, and we do this by assisting discovery. So very much supporting the visitor to come to their own meaning of things, and we encourage active participation and social interaction, which is what I hope to show you a little bit of in that hands-on activity we'll do later. So this is our mission, to inspire futures. So future young people who will participate in science or may take a job related to science, including becoming scientists, engineers, technicians. Our core value is to be open for all. So actually really trying to reach out to much broader audiences. And we have one of our core strategic ambitions is to grow Science Capital in individuals and society. And whilst the Inspiring Futures document at the moment is getting a revamp, so this is, we're going to have another version of this, and this already was reissued in 2020. This was the page about growing Science Capital. So what is Science Capital? So your Science Capital is like, if you imagine, and some of you may know already this concept, is like we imagine it as like an invisible backpack that you carry around with you every day and across a lifetime. So it's a representation of your overall engagement or not with science, so with environmental science or with anything. So it comprises what you know about science, STEM. What you know is your sort of content knowledge and your knowledge about how science works is one element, but it's also made up of what you do. So what you do as a student outside of school, which might be going to a science club, it might be reading science magazines, it might be watching science on a science documentary on television, it might be going to a science museum or a science centre. So that makes up your science capital. And also who you know, so the people that are close to you. So it might be your parents have studied science to some degree. It might be not your parents, but a relative, or it might be the friends that you choose that are close to you actually use science in their jobs and talk to you about it. So who you know can affect how you think. And how you think about science is another matter as well. Obviously, there are people who have clearly high science capital who are very engaged, very passionate about science. You know, they'll say, oh, I love science. It's, you know, it's the best thing. But there are others who will see that science for them is very abstract. It's hard, difficult, and they would certainly say it's not for me. So this survey that I'm going to show you is I'm sharing a survey that was done in the UK with school students in and around our 5 museums. And it was undertaken by King's College London and University College London. I think there were about 3,600 students that were questioned, and these are the results. So of all those students, 5%, and we were thinking then this is almost can be mapped onto the UK, have high science capital. So it's a very low number. They're more likely to be male and more likely to be socially advantaged. So those are them, and they tend to go on to study science at university, go on to be scientists and engineers. The 20% who have low science capital, that's they view science is not for me, they're more likely to be female and socially disadvantaged. And then there's a large proportion who have medium science capital, and we would say they were interested in science, but they make no particular effort to engage with it. So this was really of interest to us. It helped us to think about the people who visit our museums or interact with us online. We recognize that we will be visited actually by a lot of people with high science capital, partly because science is in our title, as is in museum, and some of those with medium will as well. But people with low science capital don't feel comfortable or welcome in sciencey spaces, and so we're unlikely to see them in our museums unless they're part of a school group which are more diverse. So this highlights how important our educational audiences are to us and how important it is to ensure we support schools to maximize their visit. And if you remember when I said, you know, your bag, your science capital bag that you carry around, if one of the elements is what you do, going to other places and not just school actually supports this science engagement. So I wanted just to move on to this diagram about our open for all value, but you'll see how it connects to science capital in a moment. So if we get back to this audience and how we engage with our end users, if you look at the diagram that's representing equality, this is suggesting that, you know, we give everyone the same, we share the same amount of resource for different types of people. But in the analogy of equality, you can see that obviously that very tall person can get to all the things, whether it's on the top shelf or the bottom shelf, while the person who is the shortest can't even reach that lower level shelf, and so the opportunity is not provided to them. They're not supported to do so. So equity is about fairness, giving people access to the same opportunities, and sometimes that clearly means that you have to support those people more. But but that is actually the fair thing to do. And the science capital approach is about social justice. It means removing all barriers so everyone has a choice. And obviously, we're not there yet. So I then wanted to kind of cite the museum in the learning landscape. So we know people can bump into science in many different spaces. So how can you connect these spaces? You know, when you engage with a group, can you extend the experience to include these other spaces? So not just school, but how do you connect school with the home, with the informal learning spaces that are available to them, and in everyday life? So the museum offer, you know, opportunities that museums provide is that we can connect with the whole learning landscape. So we certainly, when we're running our events and other things like that, we try and signpost people to things that are outside of our museum and to resources that are available to them on the internet, for instance. We want to broaden up the idea of what STEM is, so that it isn't just becoming a scientist or an engineer, but looking at other people and putting in front of our audiences people who use science in their jobs, but maybe the sorts of jobs that you didn't think involved or needed science. And we showcase the applications, the relevance of science in everyday life. But it's not just about science content knowledge, it's about highlighting the skills that people can gain from coming to places like ours, the attitudes that can be changed as a result, inspiring them to do more and to do something after a visit, are the things that I think are opportunities that museums can present. And later I will really focus down towards the end of my talk on the sorts of things we're doing around the environmental themes that obviously you've all been talking about over the last 2 days. So here's this opportunity now. I've kind of talked a bit, so I thought time for you to do something as well. So I've got we have object hunts at the museum, and these are sort of small things that you can pick up from the front desk that encourage people to go and have a little look at objects. And these object hunts have challenges in them that people can then use the museum to pick and choose the sorts of things that they think meet that challenge. So I know you're all at desks, so the challenge I'm going to set you, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do it. You can either find something on your desk or in the room that you're actually in at the moment. And I'll just present the challenge in a moment to you. And then there are 2 challenges I have. And then if you can come back, either write in the chat, hopefully somebody can keep the eye on the chat for me as well, write in the chat or turn your cameras on, because it'd be lovely to see some of you. Otherwise you feel like you're talking to yourself. And then write in the chat about the object you found, just describing it a little bit in the chat. So I want you to find something that was grown or made locally. And then the second challenge, something that you can reuse many times. So it doesn't matter what it is. If you can't do both, do one. And I'll give you just a couple of minutes to run around either your desk or your room to try and find something to just show me. And honestly, anything you say will be relevant, because this is about you, not me.
Karen, I think the attendees can turn their cameras on. Only us.
We can only. Yeah, what a shame.
But they can look around, obviously, and
Jennifer,
and write on the chat.
I can see they're not real. Oh no, I don't mean that. I was just thinking they look very real, Jennifer. Brilliant.
I couldn't see Jennifer before. Now I can.
I'm just fascinated what people are finding. That's the thing. Always a joy.
Karen, I will read out to you what people are writing, okay? Caroline Pires said, sorry, the chat's moving, so where is it? Karen, I found paper.
Paper?
Oh, yeah, paper.
Hopefully recycled.
Something that has been it can be used many times. I'm not sure. Caroline Pires, maybe you can clarify which category that one you wanted to go into, okay? So Isa said something I can use many times, my water bottle.
Yeah, brilliant.
Izzy said, I have a homemade cactus.
Oh, nice.
Mirella always said, I've got glasses and plates. Fabiana Pegoraro said, I am real. I have a glass of water that can be reused.
Oh, brilliant. There we are. So perfect.
And Tamiris Magalhães said, I have a seashell and rocks collection that I got from the beach and the forest near me, and I chose my steel water bottle. Haha.
Oh, that's very good. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for taking part.
Linda said, plants grown by my partner, speaker that I use all the time, and a dinner freshly made and brought to me. Marisa Cristina said, I've got a small cloth to clean computer screens. Héliton Barros said, I've got a cushion that can be used many times. Raquel Silva said, I've got a plant that she planted herself. She grew it herself. And something that she can use many times, a fabric napkin.
Oh, okay.
That's more sustainable, I suppose.
Yeah, better.
Tamiris Rusafa said, something that was made locally, coasters. It can also be used. So this is something that can be reused. It was grown locally. Fabulous. And finally, Marisa Cristina said, I've got a water bottle.
Great. So thank you all for taking part in that. So one of the things that you can then do is obviously you want to link that object again to your lesson. So if it's on environmental science or research, whatever it is, you want to link it. I happen to have a jar of honey for mine, something that was made locally. This was made about sort of 10 minutes walk from where I live, and it's the honey is raw, filtered, unheated and unblended. So one of the things then that you can go on to say is talk about the carbon footprint of getting it to me and of the materials being used to put the honey in. It might be about the bees themselves and why are bees important to the environment, that they sort of pollinate food crops, pollinate wild plants, produce honey. Although, as I understand it, honeybees do compete with wild bees, so maybe that's not such a good thing. And you could even go beyond that, from that conversation to talk about its effectiveness as an antibacterial or antifungal, and that varies depending on the honey. So there are many things that can be linked to either the topic that you're teaching or science in general. But the one thing that's great about it is that everyone brings a different object. So the object is never chosen by, for instance, the teacher or facilitator like we are in the museum. It's brought by the people who are interested because it belongs to them. So what you're trying to do is link the science that you're teaching in your classroom to the things that are important to them or that they have around them. So at least they start to equate the fact that things that belong to them or are in their home actually have a science connects. And more often than not, people don't realize this until they're told it. But the challenge, it's the same challenge for everyone, but actually everyone brings different insights into it, and it can create quite a wide-ranging conversation. And I think it's about, for the students, it's about choice and control, which is again something that sort of Jennifer talked about as well. You know, things that are meaningful to them really kind of help the conversation to flow. So that's that. And then I just wanted to very quickly plug a digital app. So our object hunts are available and downloadable online, and they run across different themes as well. But we've created a free digital app on Android or iPhone called Treasure Hunters. It's based on the same principle as object hunts, so there's always a challenge, and you can work in teams, but we've added a competitive element. So do download it if you want to. There is a Portuguese option. It's not Brazilian Portuguese, but there is a Portuguese option, and it can be used anywhere, not just our museums. So that was just a plug as I'm going along. So back to our audiences and how the Science Capital approach is helping us. Its approaches we all use tend to favour those who are already engaged with science. That is people like us. So those people with potentially sort of high science capital, maybe medium, and it excludes people who face inequalities in wider society. So taking a science capital approach helps us apply equitable practice to our work so that a broader range of people can engage with and participate in science. So I'm going to share with you I'm going to move on to show you how we are making these changes, how are we trying to make our work more equitable. So the most effective tool that we have created is a set of reflection points, and it helps us reflect on what needs to be considered in our everyday interactions out on the floor of our museums, and when creating new experiences like new resources to download, new science shows, new events. So we use this, and they're based on the Science Capital research, and there are 9 reflection points. Ideally, you would try and use them all, but it's always useful to at least pick a few to be able to focus on. So I'm going to pick out a few very quickly and just give you some examples of just how we use them. So in the one which is about using inclusive language, when we run our science shows, we have an explainer who goes, "Oh, hi, I'm an explainer at the Science Museum, and I'm going to tell you all about rockets, how they get up to space and what happens in space when the scientists working on board are doing their experiments, and then how it comes back to Earth." So what they're saying is, I'm going to tell you how rockets work, but if you were to be more inclusive and support those people who feel like they're always told, well, you don't know, so I'm going to tell you, we say now, "Oh, hi, I'm an explainer at the Science Museum, and today, together, we are all going to find out how rockets work and how they get up to." So it's a very subtle change of language that is more inclusive for those who are less confident with science, but it does help the process. What often happens, though, is that when the presenter does it, halfway through they go back to saying, "I'm going to tell you again." So I think it's not an easy thing to do, because you go back often to the default position. The highlight and develop skills one is, the interesting thing there is we used to have in our shows, you know, you get a volunteer up and they do an activity on stage with you, and when they went back into the audience, you say, "Oh, thank you so much, you've been an absolutely amazing volunteer, real genius," and you know, there's a lot of clapping. But now, from the Science Capital approach, we're trying to do things differently. So when a volunteer comes up for a particular activity, we relate that activity to a skill. So it might be that they come up, they do the activity, and then we say right at the end, thank you so much. You have been a great problem solver today, just like an engineer or just like a person who does science in their work. So it sort of gives them the value, so that when they go down, they know, well, I used a skill, not I'm amazing. So it reinforces the thing that they never hear from anyone else, particularly if they don't have family who have a sciencey background, because otherwise probably their parents tell them every day things like that. The other one about using everyday examples, again, it's a trap we all fall into, is sometimes the examples we choose are not every day to everyone. So they're not universal examples. I'll give you the thing I remember is we have an exhibit where we have carbon dioxide dry ice pellets go into a tank of water, and the carbon dioxide turns from a solid straight into a gas. And that is used a lot in special effects in the theatre. So people said, oh, we'll give that everyday example. It's special effects in the theatre. But actually, when we thought about it, not everyone goes to the theatre nor have the money to do so. But actually, a better and more universal example would be to say that you see these special effects in the cinema, because a lot more people have experienced that. So again, these help to bring it to that level again, trying to reduce the barriers to those people who find science more challenging and not feeling included in the conversation. And we always extend the experience. So what we try and do is whenever we do something, it's not a one-off. We try and extend it, either go to another gallery and see this, or go home, on your way home, look at this, go back to school, try something at home. So it's always extended. We have copies of this in much more detail, which should be on the website, or maybe somebody will put it in the chat for me. I don't know, I did hand them in. So these are in Brazilian Portuguese and also in English. So there is a much sort of more detailed view of all of those things. So, okay, we'll move on to resources. The thing about, so before we took this science capital approach, these were some of our hands-on activities. You're very attractive. There's a storyboard, things to do, and then on the website there was information that you could read. What we found is that that doesn't always that isn't enough, certainly from a science capital perspective. So we did a major transformation with our science capital research over the last 4 years, and these are some key features of the new resources, which are the same sort of activity as the old ones, but we've now, right at the beginning, we highlight the skills used and developed through the activity, so that you can see there it's about making observations, your curiosity. There is a page for adults. We say it's an overview for adults, and we wrote it so it was meaningful if you were a parent reading it, or a supporter of a child reading it, or if you were a teacher. It didn't really matter, but it didn't exclude one or the other. So as a parent, if you read a teacher's resource, you might go, it's not for me, because that's the teacher, it's the teacher's thing. So we tried to do a page that would work for teachers and the parents. This page, overview for adults, is mainly obviously for high science capital families and medium, and it gives you some science background. We used accessible language, trying to make the science pretty clear, and we added the science in your world, so where you see it in everyday life, and then a did you know fact for the adult that they could share with the children as well, so that they kind of get a sort of hero level too. And then the next two are the picture story, just as we did before, but we've made sure that we choose easily sourced and, where possible, sustainable everyday materials. We encourage that investigation and the science talk, which is another element of the Science Capital principles, is that you should encourage children talking to each other about science, or to their families about science. There are easy to follow instructions, and there's always an everyday STEM link that everyone can relate to, which is the science in your world. So the two picture story pages were meant for the group, if you were a teacher, to get on with themselves, or parents and children to do it together at home. And for the low science capital family, certainly they get to do the picture story and then have the everyday STEM link, so that the science comes out, you know, when you're doing the activity, rather than you do it and you have no idea how it relates to your life. So those were the differences. These are all our resources. I've circled in green the climate resources and activities that we have. So there's a website link there around the resources, and we have things like hands-on activities, we have object hunts, we have games and apps, and we have 3D objects as well. So some objects that you can turn in space and time. So those are the resources. So now I wanted to go on to some of the environmental themes that we are covering at the museum at the moment. These are sort of my final slides, really. And so the first one is the environmentally themed exhibitions that we've got at the moment. So the one, Our Future Planet, showcases cutting-edge technology and nature-based solutions being developed to trap carbon dioxide released by human activity. And I've just made a little bigger picture of the mechanical tree prototype, which was inspired by nature, and it absorbs CO2 from the air. So these are obviously prototypes at the moment, but could potentially be, you know, actually developed further and put out in. We also have an exhibition called Amazonia. So this is by the Brazilian-born social documentary photographer and photojournalist, Sebastian Salgado, who worked with 12 different indigenous communities over 7 years to produce this series of powerful black and white photographs. They tell the urgent story of the forest at a crucial tipping point in the fight against climate change, bringing together 200 images of indigenous leaders, communities, dramatic landscapes, waterfalls, and the weather, and the issues that you know is slowly happening over there. And so those are all available. Amazonia is finishing at the museum, at the Science Museum, the end of March, and then it opens at the Science and Industry Museum in Manchester, which is our sister museum, one of the 5 in our group, in May 22. So those are those. Then we have Science on a Sphere. So this is a global display system that uses computers and video projectors to display planetary data onto a 6-foot diameter sphere, sort of a giant animated globe. So it feeds in regular data, and we involve volunteer scientists, people who are doing this work into this Science on a Sphere program, and we train them to use the tools I'm sharing with you today, so they would know and understand about the engagement reflection points. Visitors obviously enjoy meeting people who use science in their jobs, and particularly appreciate seeing people like me involved in science. So it's really important that we try and get a real diverse mix of people as well, and include obviously men and women. So that is Science on a Sphere. Also, we have an IMAX cinema in the Science Museum and also at our National Media Museum in Bradford. And at the moment, Antarctica is available. We ran a teacher preview evening where teachers came, previewed the film, and talked to the people who had contributed to the film as well. So this was, again, an opportunity for teachers to use this as a resource. And basically it was this is a 3D exploration of Antarctica and a chance to explore how what happens there affects us all. So that was another thing that we have done and is still happening. In terms of the Amazonia exhibition, there was a talk as well, an event that ran, which was called Rainforests Protecting Our Planet's Great Protector. It was an online event, and at the beginning of that event, there was a short clip of the Amazonia exhibition. So if you're interested, you can go and have a look at that. It's obviously great because it's still available, although the event has now finished. All the talks have been saved online, and these were part of a series of climate talks, which were all created in 2021, but all of them have been saved online and can be seen. We do have a YouTube channel, which I will share with you at the end, that you can find all of those things. And again, if you've got older students, it might be that actually you use some of that in your own sort of teaching too. And then the Manchester Science Festival digital program. So the Manchester, the Science and Industry Museum in Manchester, one of our sister museums, ran the Manchester Science Festival. I've circled in green the one, let's talk about eco-anxiety. And the eco-anxiety event was about how climate change affects young people and their mental health. So it talked about what eco-anxiety is. They had specialists who came in, or people who sort of were working in this area, what resources are out there. They talked about how to talk to young people about this. And the event was devised and created by the Manchester Science Festival Young People panel. So this was a collaboration, and the young people panel were aged between 14 to 24. So they basically decided what the event was that they wanted to hear about. They produced it, and then it ran. And again, all of these are available to watch now online. Okay, so there are a couple of things I wanted to end on. So I'll talk to you about this picture in a moment. I also wanted to mention a climate change outreach program that we ran a few years ago. This was a funded project, and we worked with school groups across the UK. In the first year, we encouraged the young people to do some artworks around their thoughts around climate change. In the second year, we supported them to become science journalists in effect, and they went back to their local communities and wrote a story that was based on something in their own communities that was related to climate science and climate change and what was happening, or people who were actually doing some great stuff. And we created a sort of book out of it. And then in the third year, they were encouraged, and we supported them to do a climate change event back in their local communities. So it was supporting them throughout the program to think about this as an issue, and then support them when they went back to their own locality. So again, trying to make it meaningful to them. And for the artworks, we showcased those at the Science Museum in London on completion of that first year. So this picture here is my final example is how art and science can help engage people in science. So It's a picture from our old cockroach tour. Unfortunately, we don't do it anymore, but visitors were invited to dress up as cockroaches to begin a journey. So it was a facilitated tour through the museum, exploring the impact on the climate of scientific and technological developments from the perspective of, you know, one of the oldest, most resilient life forms on the planet, the cockroach. And basically the cockroaches were reflecting on themselves as they went round on the tour and saw all these human inventions, how humans had across the years wanted to drive cars, go faster, you know, fly planes and stuff like this. And eventually that was the problem, is that there were, you know, people were not taking care of the planet. And in fact, you know, humans were now extinct, but yet the cockroaches still existed. The thing that made this interesting is that the climate change subject at the time, and it was a few years ago, was sort of, you know, trundling along. And actually this began to get people talking to each other and get them suddenly realizing potentially what was actually going on. I mean, clearly we've gone beyond that today, but it was an interesting, different take that made people sort of slightly change the way they were thinking. So anyway,
Karen, I apologize, but I'm really conscious about time. We
Yes.
really need to come to an end. Sorry about that.
No, that is fine.
Fabulous. Well, thank you very much, Karen. I mean, coincidentally, was your last slide, I suppose. I'm so sorry for interrupting you. It's just because I'm super conscious about time.
Yes.
Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I loved everything. I love the Science Capital movement, and I was looking forward to your what we're going to say about environmental education in the Science Museum. Is just fascinating what you guys do.